It's great to have the opportunity to be here, though, because what you're doing is important. So I want to thank you in terms of looking at a conservative perspective on energy, because that's what we need to do. In terms of doing a comprehensive energy policy for the long term in the state of Michigan, that is something I plan on doing a special message on in the first half of this year. We did a lot of good work already, though, and we've spent actually several years working on what would be an outstanding policy. We had an election last year, so that took us a little bit out of the norm. So I thought it best to wait and not do it in an election year. If you look at, though, what we did already announce were a number of guiding principles that I think are the right principles we need to address, which are very consistent, I believe, with all the good work you're doing. They deal with certain topics. They deal with reliability. We need reliable power in this state that you can count on. We need affordable power in terms of something that makes us competitive both from a business perspective but also affordable from a consumer point of view. We need to be environmentally conscious in how we do this. One of the overlying things, though, that also go with those three guiding principles is we're looking to do something that's adaptable. And why do I use the word adaptable? One of the challenges we do face, which quite often I try to be very careful about not criticizing others, but is a major challenge for us to come up with our policy, is the fact that the federal government has never had a comprehensive energy policy. And that's a huge issue. That's a huge deficiency that we have at the national level. We need a comprehensive federal policy. And in order for us to be successful, we need to understand that the rules may change, how they look at life may change dramatically over the next decade or so, and we need to build a policy that can respond to that effectively. The other thing that I didn't put on my list that I know is important, it's important to me, it's important to you, is one of the topics you're discussing is also the national security aspect of energy policy. The reason we don't have it in the Michigan policy as a stated goal is we're a state. And again, if we had a national policy, it should be part of that. I think we should all recognize, though, that greater self-sufficiency is a good thing. And that's one of the opportunities we have in Michigan that I am excited about, that ties into those three guiding principles. And I'll mention that as I talk about those three principles. The other thing I want to recognize is I'm very proud to be here because I've got great team members doing good stuff, and I want to recognize the National Guard in particular. It's great to have General Stone here. I'm very proud of the efforts that our Guard has done on energy policy. We were way behind, and now we're a good role model on showing how our military can be effective, and it's our Michigan military in particular that we should be proud of. Now, going back to those principles, in effect, how do you look at the world and how can we be effective? We actually have a window of opportunity that I think is very exciting. If you look at the issues that we're creating, cost issues to some degree, environmental issues, and long-term issues, was the fact that we were largely a coal-based utility state. I think there is a large window of opportunity to say now is the time to look at a long-term transition away from coal. And it ties right into what I was talking about, self-sufficiency for Michigan, that we can go to greener energy. And when I say greener, I'm talking about hopefully less expensive, in addition to actually being more environmentally conscious in the long term. And it's really a combination. There's not just one answer, but one thing we should be proud of is we're a good natural gas state, both in terms of the natural gas we produce, but our infrastructure. And natural gas is a great alternative. If you looked at the long-term cost structures on natural gas, our ability to produce it, our infrastructure, we're well positioned to actually have a fair amount of that coal demand go to natural gas. Renewables need to be part of that. And we should be proud and proactive. Again, that's the self-sufficiency issue. It'll be interesting to watch how technology evolves, but what I would say is Michigan is a pretty solid wind state today. We're still not as solid in solar because of the cost structures. We could use a little more sunshine occasionally, but I love Michigan. But we have to be pragmatic about the environment we have. I could see technology eventually changing to make it more effective, though. Again, that's just a matter of time and technology development. But wind is out there, and wind is working well in Michigan. So really looking at those as options to say we can move from coal to greener sources in some fashion, both, again, in terms of lower dollar cost or efficient dollar cost and environmentally conscious, is a great answer. I also think there's a good opportunity in terms of reliability. And that's that balancing act when you talk about natural gas versus some of the renewables, particularly wind, reliability is an important consideration because wind does have some challenges in terms of being more reliable power because of just the nature of wind. So lots of topics for us to work on. I'm excited where we're at. I think we have an opportunity in Michigan to be a leader. I think we can be very effective in terms of looking at our consumers, in terms of households, in terms of better power sources, but also the business side. The part I would emphasize to you in particular in terms of economic development. We've done a tremendous amount of great work in the state of Michigan to make us extremely competitive. I now view us as a top 10 state for a place to locate a business in. And if you look at, we've done tax reform, regulatory reform. The two top issues I have on my list that we need to look at to keep us competitive, number one is the whole issue of talent, the skilled trades engineering talent. That is my top priority, to be very clear. And that is our distinguishing opportunity here to be the leader in the country on that. But after that, I put actually the whole topic of energy reliability and cost is probably the next most frequently heard issue that I run across after the talent issue. So this is a very important issue for our long-term competitive structure for job creation. So we need to be proactive on that. Again, I would reinforce the issue about national security that we can do our part in Michigan. And I'm proud of what the Guard's doing. We've come a long way. I would also say I think we're showing good effectiveness and good teamwork in terms of people working together. I want to thank the MPSC for their work. We've got some great people in our office that have been doing good energy work, and I just use as an illustration the good stuff going on with the Upper Peninsula. Many of you may not be aware or may not have tracked this, but one of the greatest challenges facing the UP in the last few decades has been going on with energy in the UP in terms of both short and long-term power sources and at what price. We don't have the deal totally done, but we actually brought lots of parties to the table and have successfully got term sheets done on a solution there. And what I would say is, to the degree we went through that exercise and had challenges with the federal government and many other places, that same exercise would be happening again here in the Lower Peninsula or for all of Michigan. So that's why the work you're talking about is critically important. We need to bring that same attitude of success, teamwork, and working together that we showed in the UP to all of Michigan with respect to energy policy. So I expect this to be an important issue. It's great to look out and see a number of legislators here. I've got great partners in the legislature. I always enjoy working with them, but we need the support of all of you to work together on this topic. So with that, I'm going to quit and take some questions. I know you may want a lot more detail. I'm happy to try to share some nuance, but I got to save some exciting stuff for the special message, folks, so I'm not going to give you all the details today.
Thank you, Governor Snyder, and it is absolute thrill for the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum to have you in attendance with us today, talking about what is so important to the state and the importance of energy to everyone in this room. 2015 will surely need to be the year to focus on energy policy. Giving the PA 295 and the completion and the 2015 date that's been rolling around. What do you see as our state's biggest challenge when it comes to energy policy?
In terms of energy policy, it's really getting people to all work together. I mean, that's the issue we find on most of these things in the big picture. Because again, this is not a short-term answer, and that's one of my concerns when we talk about energy policy. Is if you think about most of the issues we work on, people tend to work in a 1-year, 2-year time frame. In the Lansing construct, in the governmental construct, it usually happens because of budget cycles. People tend to think in terms of budget cycles or terms in office. That's not a good way to live one's life, folks. Particularly if you think about energy policy and think about the investments that need to be made to have effective energy. If you're talking about building a plant, if you're talking about building a wind farm, you're talking long-term investments. You're talking investments of 15 to 30-year duration. So one of the great concerns I have as we go through this exercise is we're not thinking short-term, what's someone's near-term best interest and where they're coming from, but we need to think about what's the best interest of the next 30 to 60 years in the state of Michigan. And that requires a whole different mind frame than, to be blunt, many people, particularly in this town, are used to thinking in. So that's one of the issues I have and real concerns is let's not think short-term solutions. Let's recognize we're talking about huge capital investments, huge things that will make a difference for decades. and that we appropriately match assets, liabilities, revenues and expenses, outcomes and performance over a long-term horizon.
Can Michigan do more on energy efficiency, and should that be a priority?
Yes and yes. Again, I didn't want to get into too many details, but I will share with you one of the things you're going to see a big emphasis on is energy efficiency. What's the best energy answer you can have ever is the energy you don't use. And that gets back to that prior question. What is one of my concerns about how to present this and how to get successful? Is one of the challenges when you talk about energy efficiency is how do you take that into account in the calculations and the analysis? Because it's not there. So too often when people will go through and do this work, they'll sort of skip the energy efficiency part. So when we do this thing, looking about the next 15, 30 years, these longer term horizon things, let's make sure we build in the savings from energy efficiency in that whole analysis so it's given its proper recognition in the fact we should be investing in energy efficiency. To give you a benchmark, when we had the ballot proposal back in 2012, and some people remember that one, that was not a good situation, and one of the biggest objections I had to that ballot proposal is it had no reference or mention of energy efficiency in it. Because when you hear me actually do this special message, that will be one of the most highly emphasized items is energy efficiency. So the companies that are asking that probably are smiling now because you probably have a good economic opportunity if you do it effectively. And I will share one other side story for you, and again, this is where I'm very proud of the military. Is it was interesting what they're doing now with the Guard is, those of you that have ever been to Gwynn at the old Air Force Base up in the UP, one of the first things I visited on one of my early trips to the UP as governor was to the Recreation Center in Gwynn. And it had been handed down by the U.S. Air Force. And one of the questions they had is they weren't sure they're going to be able to keep this rec center open. And why is that? Well, if you looked at traditional Air Force policy going back several decades, the Air Force policy is you had to go get approvals to make capital expenses. And if you had operating expenses, they just got rolled into the normal giant Air Force budget, so nobody cared about an operating expense. So what happened when they built the rec center in Gwynn? They didn't bother to really insulate it because that would have required more capital investment. And operating the electrical cost to operate it was irrelevant to the United States Air Force when it was going on. If you think about it, now step back and I just said no insulation and operating costs didn't matter, and now you say you have a rec center in the middle of the Upper Peninsula in winter. Talk about a dumb decision. So that just emphasizes the need for energy efficiency. Again, the point is they should have put all their money in insulation and minimized the electrical cost, but it was backward. We need to be smarter than that today.
So what are your thoughts on nuclear energy, and is natural gas a better solution than nuclear?
Well, the issue on nuclear, and nuclear I think needs to be part of the portfolio. Again, that's an important part of our energy portfolio. We're successful in Michigan in having operating plants that do nuclear. The challenge on nuclear is an option, and one of the utilities is seriously looking at it, is all the cost to get a plant up and running and all the costs to incur. I mean, this is, again, going back to the federal government, that I'm not sure there's any good reason why they shouldn't be able to license plants, get them up and running in half the time for half the cost. But that's a separate question. I'm not deciding that, and to be blunt with you, I'm not assuming the federal government's going to solve that problem. So when we look at our energy policy, I think that's where, if you look at the trade-offs, again, that's where the private sector needs to make those calls in terms of our utilities and such, but we need to be very thoughtful to say, quite often we can't assume that. Natural gas is something we produce in pretty good abundance in this state. Let's use it.
Unfortunately, you can only be governor for 4 more years. Question. But nevertheless, our energy policy must look much further into the future. When you look to the future on energy production, say 50 years out, what do you see?
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the nice comment. My wife might have a different answer. I think she's happy with the term limit thing. But it's an honor being your governor, and part of the point, this is our window of opportunity to do establish a policy. And when you say that, there will be people that will be governor after me. That's a given. But the way I view it is if we use common sense and we do smart things, why would they change it? Let's just do good judgment and make good calls and put in a policy. They say, well, that makes common sense. They can go work on something else. I didn't have that luxury in many of the things I got to see when I came to office. But if you look at it in terms of the long term, this is where I really wish we had a federal energy policy. I think the United States is well poised to have much more self-sufficiency, to have much more energy efficiency, fuel economy, better ways to run our country that from a national security point of view would be dramatically better. And that's something that I hope is part of the dialogue in 2016, 2020, whatever it takes, to finally have us stop saying, let's just ignore this question and let's be responsible. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to see with Michigan's energy policy is to say, again, this is not the government telling everyone what to do. This is us setting collectively a set of standards, benchmarks, and a framework for economic success. Again, let's take a conservative approach to this. But let's set that framework for success and operate within it because, again, that gives certainty, consistency, and better job growth opportunities, better confidence to our consumers. And then ask that the federal government look at a role model like Michigan being smart, being bright, and do the same thing there. We've got the opportunity. We've got the energy in our country. We've got the technology in our country. Let's use it smartly.
And this question goes more to the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum, our membership, and the support that we're trying to garner up across the state for efforts of both yourself and the House and Senate legislators as they work forward on policy. And so this is a question from them saying, how would you ask us in this room to support your initiatives?
No, I appreciate that. So what I'm hoping to do is come out with a special message that is common sense. Think about it. Reliability, affordability, environmentally sound, and adaptable to what the federal government does. I hope you'd sit there and say, well, gee whiz, Governor, thanks for coming with something I could have figured out on my own. And to say, how do we implement that in some effective fashion? Again, the concerns I would have is you're going to have the normal special interest question of people looking about their own self-interest versus the interests of the entire state and all our citizens. We've done a much better job of recognizing we're in this together, and I want to actually thank a lot of special interests for saying they understand we need to look out for everybody and supporting that. This question of long-term versus short-term, though, is going to be a big part of the discussion. Not in terms of how people talk about it, but what it means. So I really ask you to put on your hat to say matching assets and liabilities, matching revenue expenses, taking a long-term horizon because we're talking huge capital investments. And if people start thinking short-term, all you're going to do is interject monkey business in this thing in terms of arbitrage, other problem areas, and it won't work. And again, it should start with energy efficiency. It should move then to say, how do we become more green, both in terms of economics and environmental protections? And then how do we move in that fashion, in a thoughtful fashion that makes sense? And what's the reasonable range of saying this is fast enough, this is too slow? And how do we balance that off in terms of what time frame to do it in? I hope you get all fired up to support this. Having a stable energy policy for the state of Michigan is one of our opportunities to give us another economic advantage over the rest of the country in terms of job creation, in terms of keeping our young people here. So this is a big deal, folks. I rank this as probably one of the top 5 or so major issues and opportunities that we have in the next year to establish something important for decades to come. That's why I think it's great how you're meeting, how you're having this dialogue and discussion, and I sure hope I can count on your support to speak up. Because anytime you do something like this, again, everybody likes change until it arrives. And the natural response of everyone says, that was a really good idea until you talked about changing something that could actually impact me. So I'm going to need your support, and I hope I can earn your support. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you today.